I'm delighted to have with us today Professor Theo van Lint. He's Klaus Gulbenkian Professor of Armenian Studies at the University of Oxford and a Fellow of Pembroke College, Oxford. Professor van Lint received his PhD with the highest distinction from Leiden University back in 1996. In 2014, he received his honorary professorship from the Russian Armenian University at Yerevan, Armenia. And in 2019, he co-founded the Armenian Genocide Research Network at the University of Oxford. Professor van Lint published extensively on Armenian poetry, Armenian illuminated manuscripts of the 11th century, on Armenian sacred and religious objects, the Armenian Church, Armenian historical writing, symbolic thought in Armenian history, and on other diverse themes related to Armenian culture and history. His lecture today is dedicated to Christian apologetics and Muslim-Christian interaction in the 11th century Armenia. The case of Grigor Magistros Pahlawuni and Amir Ibrahim. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for, can everyone hear me? Yes. And my voice tends to trail away at the end of a sentence. I've been told to ask you to tell me if I become a mumbling old man, which may happen in a matter of seconds. So please feel free to. Yes, okay. Yeah. So I would like to thank you for this very kind invitation and to be cooperating with you and together with Professor Amir and to say something about a subject that is probably not very well known, the Armenian side of Muslim-Christian interaction in the 11th century, Armenian-Muslim interaction at all. So, as you may see, I have slightly added to the title because apart from Amir Ibrahim, Grigor Magistros Pahlawuni also had interaction on Christian-Muslim misunderstandings, let's call it that, with an 11th century Muslim scholar called Abu Nasr al-Manazi. We'll talk about that in the second part of the talk. Let's push the right buttons. So this is what we're going to talk about. I just did the introduction. Now we're going to first see the coming of Islam in Armenia under the Umayyads until 750, then under the Abbasids until 884, then Armenian statehood restored, Bagratuni and Artsruni kingdoms until 1065. But that's the period in which we will talk. Grigor Magistros Pahlawuni, who is this man? Then part about the Bible in verse, poetry as apologetics for Abu Nasr al-Manazi, around 1045. And then the last part, philosophy is the logos born from a virgin. So apologetics for Amir Ibrahim. And I'll make some concluding remarks after that. This is a map of the Arab domination, the Umayyad period in 654 to 750. You will easily get your bearings. We're here. And there's the Caspian, there's the Black Sea, and this is the Armenian highland, and the Arab province of Armenia in the 7th and 8th century. So with the Byzantine and Sasanian empires fatally weakened by a 30-year-long vicious war, Armenia became exposed to Arab raids in the 640s. And in 654, an agreement was reached between the Arab carriers of the new faith and the Armenian ruling Nakharar, or nobleman, Theodoros Rushtuni, Armenia's autonomous statehood was recognized. They had some obligations to pay annual tribute, offer 15,000 troops, cavalry to the Arab army. Armenia was not occupied initially. A viceroyalty was instituted, of which the Vostigan was the head, sort of governor. The whole of the Caucasus conquered by the Arabs was called the province of Al-Armenia, a state of affairs in place from at least the time of the Caliph Abd al-Malik bin Marwan, so who ruled 685 to 705. And the period saw a continued, this is important to emphasize, a continued increase in the building of churches in Armenia, indicating a continued level of prosperity, social cohesion, under the clan system of the Nakharars, of the noble houses, each in their valleys between the mountains, and of religious freedom to a certain extent. So this is what I've just talked about. So until around 700, this continued prosperity we can observe that. Then we go to the next slide. At 701, this viceroyalty was established. What was positive is that there was unimpeded church reforms under one of the Catholicoi, the heads of the Armenian Church, strengthening of the Armenian Church, Ovanes Otsnetsi, who was, according to myth or reality, very well received in Baghdad. We're not sure that he went there, but he was covered with gifts. We have in the 7th century indications for teaching of the trivium and the quadrivium, so the 7 liberal arts under a man called Anania Shirakatsi, who left a canonicon in Armenian, that indicates this the existence of this Hellenistic and then Byzantine course of teaching. And in this period also, so-called Hellenizing translations into Armenian were made. Hellenizing because of the way in which the translations were made, very close to the Greek grammar and syntax, word formation, lexicon, which is different from what happened in the 5th century when the Armenian language was first written and translations ad sensum were in place. It's also the period when you see Greek philosophy being translated, and it's possible that this almost morpheme by morpheme translation in extreme situations goes back to the wish to be extremely precise. Okay, another map. This is the Arab period under the Abbasids. It's almost the same as you can see. We will not go into the differences there. The Armenian nobility did not always look on passively as matters unfolded. The Abbasid takeover led to rebellion, which was repressed, leading to increased taxation. This happened several times, so you get rebellion, increased taxation, rebellion, increased taxation. Until in 775, the Armenian nobles were comprehensively beaten in the Battle of Bagratid, with disastrous consequences for the continuity of a number of noble houses. And by this time, Arab immigration, that's probably what is here, Arab immigration in Armenia started, and gradually Arab emirates were formed in parts of the Armenian plateau. We see intermarriage between what was left of the Armenian nobility and the Muslims, as well as military coalitions between Armenians and Muslims when one emirate fought another. The main urban centers of Armenia became Muslim. A revolt between 850 and 855 led to once more devastating punishing expeditions led by Bura, sent by Caliph al-Mutawakkil. The situation in 855 resembled that of 775. Moreover, many nobles apostatized or feigned conversion to Islam. Having been imprisoned in Samarra, they gradually returned to Armenia a few years later from 858. Nevertheless, see if they are already here. Yes. Nevertheless, out of this nadir, this low point, strength was born as well. From the later 8th century, the noble house of the Bagratuni began to rise, and when the caliphate weakened, it seized its chance to establish a strong political base in Armenia and legitimacy in the eyes of the population, leading to the coronation in 884 or 885 of Ashot the First, Ashot Metz, Ashot the Great, who was prince from 855, so the end of Burak's expeditions, to 884, and king until 890. This was the state of affairs accepted by the caliphate, who sent a crown, after which Byzantium, not wishing to give up its old claims on Armenia, followed suit. And soon a second kingdom was established. Let me see. Next slide, yes. Here you have greater Armenian kingdoms, north, south, Vaskulapan, south, Armenian kingdom, Bagratid Armenian, and the next slide, you see them more close up, Bagratid kingdom, and Vaskulapan in the south, around Lake Van. Yes, so sorry, thank you very much. You see the kingdom of Vaskulapan partly on this map only, with Lake Van here. So under the Bagratuni and the Artsuni kingdoms, we see, if you want, a renaissance in art and architecture. That means that models of the 7th century churches, etc., were reused with a new meaning. The capital of the Bagratuni kingdom, Ani, which is very close to Kars, near to the Armenian-Turkish border today, had surrounded with important monasteries, for instance, Horomos, and where the kings were buried. The Church of the Holy Cross of Akhtamar Islands was built by Gagik the First in 915 to 921. It's quite an achievement of art. It still stands. So if you go to the island of Akhtamar, you can see it has a lot of external sculpture, which is quite striking. You see in this period also strong patronage and cultivation of literacy, and the artes liberales were taught again. Monastic life flourishes. In the Vaspurakan region, you have the monastery of Narek with Anania Narekatsi and Grigor Narekatsi, the author of the Book of Lamentations and the doctor of the Universal Church, even though he is an Armenian Orthodox monastic monk. In 2015, he was made a doctor of the Church by the Pope. The important monasteries of Sanahin and Haghpat in the north of Armenia, and Marmashen in the Bagratid kingdom as well. And in this period also the Pahlawuni family gains prominence in the kingdom of Ani, and some hold the office of Sparapet, which means the commander-in-chief of the army of Armenia. And so here we have the kingdom of Vaspurakan. Here we go to Byzantine expansion into Armenia. That is the period we are talking about now. So we swing between these two maps, actually, or these three maps. This one and this one. In the 10th century, the 10th century, Byzantium expanded more to the east and put pressure on these Armenian kingdoms, which then lost their independence in 1021 in Vaspurakan, when the king exchanged his lands for land near Sebastia and Melikini, and in 1045 when the kingdom of the Bagratuni followed suit against the wishes of the hero of the talk, Grigor Magistros Pahlawuni. Who was the man? So he was one of this rising noble family, born around 990, died in 1058. He was born in Bijni. If anyone has been to the Republic of Armenia, it's in the northwest. The Pahlawuni trace their lineage to, Pahlawuni means Parthev, so Parthian, to Saint Gregory the Illuminator, who converted Armenia to Christianity in 301 according to the Armenian Church and 314 according to scholars, and several dates in between. And he was also related to the Arsacid kings who ruled from beginning of the Common Era to 428, who were also Parthians. They were usually the junior branch of the kings of Iran. In 1021, Grigor's father, Vasak Pahlawuni, who was the commander-in-chief of the kingdom, is killed. Grigor inherits the family estate and spreads his wings. Before that, he had a good education in Ani, and he now has important commissions and important role to play. He founds an academy, which he continues to let thrive when he goes into exile. He teaches the trivium and the quadrivium, and he moves in the highest court circles in Ani, the capital of the Bagratid kingdom. He does more. He has a great friendship with the Catholicos Petros Getadarts, a very well-educated man, whose jailer he actually is in Bijni, the castle where he was born, in the late 1030s. And the gentlemen became good friends, if they weren't that before that already. Then in 1042, there's something quite important happens. Together with his uncle, the Sparapet Vahram, he leads the party to anoint young King Gagik after Hovannes Sembat, the previous king's death. And then he falls out with the king through the intrigues spun by his son-in-law, Vestes Sarkis, the leader of the pro-Byzantine party. You must imagine that the pressure of Byzantium was not just hard power, but also soft power. So from the 10th century onwards, they started giving a lot of titles to Armenian nobility in the west, in the province of Taron, west of Lake Van, and others. And so people were co-opted into the reward system and the safety of the Byzantine Empire. And the Bagratid kingdom wanted to hold out against that. There was a party against the Byzantine meddling, if you want, of which Grigor was part, together with his family, and against his son-in-law, who very much wanted Byzantine influence and probably expected high rewards for that position. Then in 1045, the young King Gagik, perhaps 20 years old or so, was lured to Byzantium, imprisoned and forced, first in a golden cage and then a bit less, and forced to cede the kingdom of Ani to Byzantium. And Grigor, who travels after him and who had advised against this, sees that the situation is hopeless, and he then hands over his own lands as well to the emperor, and he is rewarded with various governorships and titles. The Duke of Taron, Vaspurakan, and Mesopotamia, which were provinces recently. Mesopotamia is not our Mesopotamia; it's much more to the north. Which were recently incorporated into Byzantium and had large Armenian populations. The essential thing is that he was not allowed to return to Ani, to his home base, and that's what the Byzantines very cleverly did not allow. So what does he do further? In Byzantine service, he prosecutes the Tondrakians, one of the sects that was widespread both in Armenia and in the Byzantine Empire. And in one of his letters, he writes about them that he didn't raise his hand against them. They were only branded with the sign of the fox, which a heretic would be given, so that you would know what you have to do with. But he didn't torture them, as he says they would have been deserved to have been. He didn't do that. I find that an interesting remark in the 11th century. So there were you could choose not to do that. That was possible. In 1048, he co-heads a military campaign for Byzantium against the Seljuks, which ends in defeat. In 1055, when the emperor dies and new emperor rises to the throne, he may have moved to a monastery, something he wanted to do, and then a few years later he dies. And then in the aftermath, quite shortly after he died, in 1065, his son Bahram is consecrated Catholicos of all Armenians, so the head of the Armenian Church, as Grigor II, a martyrophilos, v'kayaser in Armenian, initiating 1.5 century of Pahlawuni Catholicoi, so a sort of church king state, not state, but function, until the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia is established. And one of his great-grandchildren is Nerses Schnorr-Hali, who's a famous Armenian Catholicos in the 12th century. So this is direct impact in life. What did he write? He was an intellectual. He was a layman, exceptionally, because most writers were clerics. One of his works is the Magnalia Dei, the Mighty Acts of God, which is the first biblical epic in rhyming verse in Armenian, which was edited and translated by Abraham Terian in 2012, sorry, millennium out. He wrote a commentary, like many others did, on Dionysius Thrax's Grammatica Techne, so the basic grammatical and rhetorical introduction in the schools, which was in use for over a century, which is edited by Gohar Muradyan in 2012 as well. Then he has a collection of letters, about 90 letters, also edited by Muradyan in 2012, which is of a very complex nature, both through the contents, its allusions, and the language he writes them in. It's can be extremely difficult to really understand well. He also writes an encomium on the Holy Cross, a poem of about 100 lines, and some sacred hymns, which have recently been studied and rediscovered, actually, quite a few of them. So here we have the cover of the Magnalia Dei. These are 2 books devoted to his and others' sacred hymns, and this is the title page of the edition of his works. So you can recognize it when you randomly find them. He also made translations. We're not sure whether the translation we have of the Timaeus or the Phaidon, not the Phaedron, the Phaidon, were by him. It's quite likely that the Timaeus was actually translated by him. As Irene Tinti has argued on the chronology and attribution of the Old Armenian Timaeus, Status Questionis, possibly translated Euclid's Element of Geometry, and it's not a settled question. Maybe it's not a translation we have. He says in a letter that I have begun to translate Plato's Timaeus, Plato's Phaedon, and also Euclid, and I'm planning to translate everything that has not yet been translated from Greek and Syriac into Armenian. And there had been a lot of work done already, so he was perhaps optimistic about his age, but he won't have been the only one, as I have occasion to note. Let's go then to the meat, so to say, of the talk. So the Magnalia Dei, the Bible in verse, Apologetics for Abu Nasr al-Manazi. As I said, Grigor is the author of the first biblical epic written in Armenian, the verse with end rhyme that was not used in Armenian before, at least not for a whole work. We have it in the Book of Lamentation by Grigor Magistros in prayer 25 and 26, and a few other places there are parts that rhyme. And the preface relates how the first Armenian Bible in verse came about, and I'm going to quote that in full, and I'll pronounce it, but you can also read it. It's 3 pages of text. In the year 494 of the Armenian era, that is 1045, I, Grigor Magistros, the son of the God-protected Vasak, the Pahlawuni leader and duke, was in the God-protected city of Constantinople during the reign of the pious and Christ-crowned Emperor Constantine Monomachos. There we happened to meet a Hagarian man named Manazi, very knowledgeable in Ishmaelite learning, illustrious in every academic discipline, versed in epic recitation and rhetoric, and accomplished in poetry. We must honestly admit that he was distinguished and highly esteemed for composing encomia and works in Homeric and Platonic meter and verse. I always wonder what Platonic meter and verse is. To this day, he receives yearly awards and gifts from the caliphs of Egypt and Babylon, that's Baghdad, for his poetry, and Byzantine emperors have bestowed on him lavish honors from the lowest order to that of proconsul. For several days, this man was challenging us with rhetorical questions on all complexities and ingenious discoveries, and he did not cease to confront us with thought-provoking and ever-new conundrums. And when he could neither mask something nor confront with inexplicable things, he would stagger like one injured while running, very much like a child hopping here and there, running with exhaustion and playing games like juggling apples. He then ventured into the highest mystery, criticizing our evangelists that they did not set the Gospels in beautifully fitting and balanced words, in rhythmic verse and rhyming lines, or in the form of encomium, expressing high praise. He went on to deride our Bible, saying, "Your Psalter and scriptures are neither adequate nor a whole book, but a compilation of a sort." And he kept extolling the Quran of the Muslims, magnifying and commending it, saying that it is a marvel greater than miracle. Whereas our Muhammad, he says, starting from Adam down to himself, narrated the whole thing with consistent rhyming of the lines quite mystically. And he was telling so many verses are in this letter and so many are in that particular letter, so he means to rhyme. And he was telling how often the same endings recur. We claim no one nowadays, he says, could create or reproduce even a single verse, for it is difficult to conceive and to sustain consistently the aforementioned rhyme. While it is not difficult for poets to theologize in a new way and on their own, logically and in a learned fashion, or to come up with an encomium balanced verse, such expression, however, flows with difficulty from the outset, whereas that of Muhammad was endowed by the Spirit, for he balanced these spiritual verses with identical rhyme. Then, placing my hope, Grigor says, in the Holy Spirit, in the Lord, the Creator and Sustainer, I began to say, it is neither through prophetic vision, nor through science, nor through skill, but that the poetry of the Arabs, as in the course of an ordinary speech, tends to end the lines with rhyme, which you call kafiyah. Since you deem it a prophetic revelation, that which took your Muhammad 40 years to write, I could put it in lines for you in 4 days, beginning from Adam until the second coming of his Creator. Moreover, I could write it for you in lines ending with that magnificent rhyme of the letter Nun, which you were praising. And he kept betting many a time, you couldn't do it. Nice discussion between the gentlemen, very civilized. After writing it in 4 days, there we are, by the grace of God, having freed myself from everything, I began to read it in his presence. Thereupon, he was astounded, greatly amazed, and choking with stutter, he asked, by what skill were you able to write this book so expertly and quickly? It's not a very good poem, I must say. In my truthfulness, I said, when we Christians resort to prayer, the Holy Spirit comes to our aid and teaches us the whole truth. And he confessed with astonishment that the God of the Christians is great. Because of this confrontation, Grigor continues, I dare to write this, since they praise the Quran very highly, esteeming it on account of the kafiyah. And then he finishes, now you students of rhetoric, perhaps his own students, write my memorial in this document and remember me, Grigor, the God-protected Pahlawuni leader and duke, in prayer. And may the Lord grant you the grace of his mercy. Amen. So that's the end of the introduction of it. And so what is a bit of the context of this encounter? So Abu Nasr al-Manazi insists on the miraculous inimitability of the Quran. The theory of the Ijaz al-Quran was systematically developed by Muslim mutakallimun beginning in the 9th century, so theologians, logical theologians. when also Arab Christian polemics against the Quran began to appear and become quite fierce. And al-Baqillani, who lived until 1013, wrote a work with the title Ijaz al-Quran. He's not the only one who wrote that, so the inimitability of the Quran. And that is an important background to this discussion. So it's quite apt to have this in the 11th century. And David Waynes, in the Bible in Muslim Christian Encounters, part of the second volume of the Cambridge History of the Bible, writes, "Scripture's linguistic purity and eloquence, unrivaled by any human product, was the unique apologetic miracle that confirmed the prophet's status." So what we're talking about is not just how beautiful one can write, but on that hangs actually the stamp, the seal of approval by God of the prophet, of Muhammad. So that's what is really at stake. And we will see that later as well. Next one. Then one may ask whether this encounter was fact or fiction. Al-Manazi will not have understood the Armenian, but may have recognized the end rhyme that was deployed and then have pronounced his astonishment. And in the Armenian tradition, as I said, it introduces monorhyme in epic poetry, and only Grigor Magistros uses it before him in his Book of Lamentation. And is the encounter fictitious? I do not think so, but the exercise in apologetics may have been useful for Grigor for himself to sustain his faith and to instruct his pupils, to whom he may be turning at the end of the introduction, as you just saw. And he provided Armenian Christianity with a template to counter the argument against the Bible. So in that sense, it's a very useful tool. And it was transmitted quite widely, actually. So much about that encounter. Then now the second encounter in writing, which is a quote, number 7 is a quote, "Superior to all this is the word born from a virgin," as Grigor writes in one of his letters, Apologetics for Amir Ibrahim, perhaps in the 1040s or 1050s. We think that the letters were written from the 1030s onwards. So it's probably in this period. So there are different circumstances from the encounter with Al-Manazi. This did not take place in person in Constantinople. He received a written request from Amir Ibrahim for a letter on faith and a letter on philosophy. Ibrahim's father is Muslim, his mother is Armenian, and Amir Ibrahim is well versed in Armenian, so he could very well understand what Grigor was writing, and he better had, because what he writes is not easy. There are 2 letters and 1 purpose: to convince the interlocutor to reject Muhammad and embrace Christianity. Then the practical information in the 2 editions, letter 9 and the old edition, letter 70 on faith, 26 in the now current edition, old edition 71 on philosophy. The letter on faith is the longest in the whole epistolary, 26 pages A4, double column, and the language I've called manageable. It's understandable classical Armenian. There are difficulties here and there because Grigor never writes really easy, but he writes to the level that his interlocutor can understand. He really is a communicator, and that is, in Armenian studies, he was always seen as someone who is rather a solipsist or a show-off. With his impossibly difficult language, but I think that is a fundamentally wrong assumption. The letter on philosophy is much more difficult in language and imagery, and there is a reason for that, to which I hope we can come. Let's first look at Amir Ibrahim's questions. So you must imagine someone who comes from a mixed marriage, 2 different faiths, who are at loggerheads with one another. Islam sees itself as the natural successor to Christianity and Judaism, and Christianity does not accept further revelation after the ascension of Christ. So what does Amir Ibrahim ask? I first quote Grigor: "I shall not sufficiently honor your request if I praise it once or twice or 3 times, but 10,000-fold. You desired from us to record in writing, first, manifestations of Jesus' divinity in the present life and the stewardship of providence in the incarnation. How could Jesus in weakness ask the Father to let the cup pass him by if he is God?" The prayer at Golgotha. How could Jesus say that he who betrays me commits a great sin? That who to place on the right or left of the Father is not for Jesus to decide, but for the Father who sent him, and that the Father is greater than he if both are God. The 4th question concerns the passions of the body and the Father receiving Jesus' Spirit. Then, 5th question, on Mount Sinai, did Moses speak with God himself or with an angel? And who were the 2 angels that appeared before Abraham, warned Lot, and destroyed Sodom? Then did Adam eat the fruit from the forbidden tree against God's will, if God saw fit that he would do so? Already knew this, the foreknowledge of God. That points to free will. How can good and evil both be from God if one says that evil is from Satan and good from God? And 9, an important one, is God image or form or not? Then do the pagan philosophers say that there is one God, or do they say that the Trinity exists? And then back to Jesus. If Jesus is God, why does Paul say our intercessor? Well, the intercessor with himself. Then the last question, did the 24 prophets describe matters in the same way as Muhammad did? So is Muhammad in the line of prophecy according to you or not, he says. So the nature of Amir Ibrahim's questions, questions 1 to 4 and 11 pertain to Jesus' nature, are taken together with question 9 on whether God is image or not. Questions 5 to 7 regard the Old Testament figures, the Hebrew Bible ones, Moses, Abraham, and Adam. Questions 8 to 10 consider the nature of God, and question 12 inquires about the authority of the Bible versus that of Muhammad regarding the number of prophets and his own place therein. And Grigor answers the questions in his own way. He doesn't really answer 1 to 4. Some background here. Muslim concerns about Christianity. So Amir Ibrahim's questions concern matters central to Muslim difficulties with Christianity, as you probably know. One of them is the Trinity. God is one, not 3. So are there 3 gods in Christianity? So is it not a monotheistic religion, but actually a pure polytheistic one? And there can, for Islam, of course, not be a divided divinity. That is impossible. The incarnation is a confusion of categories. It confuses the realm of the divine with that of the human, which is logically impossible and goes against the grain of the Islamic theology of the time, 9th and 10th century. And then the status of Muhammad, of course, is another hot point. A prophet who is the last prophet and sent by God. And this relates back to the question we have discussed about the inimitability of the Quran. And then there is the status of the Bible. Is it falsified or not? So that's certainly the New Testament. Should be falsified, not falsified. Is the New Testament relation of crucifixion and the resurrection? Is that interpolation? Is that dreamt up? 4 different witnesses in the Gospels. They say different things. There are contradictions, etc. So how does that work? Those were questions that were posed on the Islamic side. And so, looking at the background of this encounter, there's a very useful book by David Thomas, Christian Doctrines in Islamic Theology, published in 2008. And he publishes in Arabic and translates into English and discusses pertinent works by Al-Nashi al-Akbar, Fi al-Malakat, and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, Kitab al-Tawhid, and Abu Bakr al-Bakilani, who I already mentioned, another book, which he translates the introduction. and then Abd al-Jabbar ibn Ahmad al-Hamadani, Persian scholar, in his Mughni fi Abwab al-Tawhid wal-Adl. I must apologize for my pronunciation. I do not know Arabic, so I'm just acting here. The Summa on Divine Oneness and Justice. The interesting thing that Thomas says about these theological work in Islam is that they are not directed against the Christians. They are helps for Muslims to understand the problems with Christianity rather than a direct encounter with Christians. And you could say that perhaps the Bible in verse that Grigor wrote is a mirror image of that. So then Grigor's answers, they are not in the framework that goes to the heart of Muslim concerns. He sets his own agenda for the answers. So he begins with question 9, is God image or form or not? And says only God can fully know himself, the prophet witnessed to him, catching glimpses, never the whole or the reality. And so, for instance, one of the images he says, well, Prophet Ezekiel has this vision of a man, a lion, an eagle, and an ox. And of course, that is not the essence of God, is not called in that. His is not image and not form and not quantity and not measurement and not matter, not type, not body, not existence or non-existence, not beginning, not middle and not end, not time. He is not light, although he is said to be, and not darkness, because he is a disperser of darkness, not power, although he is dispenser of power, and not place, because he is not enclosed by place, and not anything else that exists in our understanding and knowledge. No one has known him as he is, and if he were known, then it is not God, because even though the prophets in each century, according to order and need of the time, have known a part and a glimmer, yet never the whole, because he cannot be circumscribed and is unreachable. But it is good Christian teaching. I would imagine that Amir Ibrahim would agree with that. And then questions 5 to 7. God himself spoke with Moses on Mount Sinai. Abram's visitors, those were truly angels. And then Adam's eating of the fruit by the will of God or independent from it. And Grigor relates the views of many traditions on the first humans by Chaldeans, Greeks, Cappadocians, Ethiopians, Jews, Egyptians, Persians, etc. And he says, don't pay attention to all these interpretations. Rely on Moses, who relays the divine injunctions. And so here you have actually a circle argumentation, which is, in a sense, very disappointing. You're looking for a real encounter, and from both sides, you do not get a real encounter. You get a drawback to the own accepted truth and reality, which is, I think, a pity. Because God created everything as food for Adam, but from those trees for a little while, I like this one, he prohibited them to eat, so that he would eat from it at a fitting time, and transformed to a good side, he would be drawn near to God. I wonder if there is any Talmudic teaching about this, the deferral of eating from the tree, or whether this is a permanent prohibition. I will certainly look into it on the Christian side, which I haven't done yet. And then question 8. God is all good and evil is non-existent. It's a fiction. God is always good. The constituent of all that is good. Because also in the creation of the world, we understand that everything was created well, and having brought it to an end, he sees that everything was completed for the good. And because evil is not existent and has not come into existence and is not from existence, then why do we say that it has come from Satan, who used to be the morning star, and he does not have the power to bring into being the things that do not exist? And these things I say clearly to you. Therefore, you should understand evil thus. It is not is, and not everything is evil, because that which is not shall not become at all not is, since it is not. So it's neither existent nor non-existent, it's just not there. Because good is from the is and shall be, but evil is not from is and is not in is. That is this philosophy. And then in question 10, what about the secular philosophers confessing one God? Grigor mentions a series of philosophers, the Pythagoreans, he mentions Plato, states the well-known idea of the partial illumination of those preceding and outside Christianity, and their insights do not lead to a complete, truthful picture, so you don't get the whole. But they did not know the unity of God, nor the Trinity, but honored the number 3, considering it abundant, having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the number 1, because they honored the first number, continuing with geometrical comparisons, reminiscent of Plato's Timaeus, which is an important text for him throughout his oeuvre. You see this appearing again and again. The point, the line, and the plane, the cube. All right, then Grigor addresses the problem of the Trinity, followed by the incarnation, which is gradually revealed, prophesied in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament in Christian terms, witnessed to by New Testament authors and figures in it. Again, a fallback on the own position. He addresses the objection that the scriptures have been tampered with and are unreliable. He uses a rather childish argument. He said, well, was Muhammad there when the evangelists wrote the gospel? No, he wasn't. So, okay, not the highest standard of philosophy, but still, it's interesting. He writes that. Then he moves to the crucifixion, which is predicted in the Old Testament. Well, we have all these texts that are interpreted in Christian patristics, and that he uses. And then he attacks Muhammad. He does it rather bang, hard on. Does not tally with the New Testament. If Ibrahim does not believe him, he must read the Hebrew Bible, which is interesting. So go back to the basic text. In this case, that makes sense. Grigor adduces the Quran in refutation and calls for conversion of Amir Ibrahim. And he says, and now I come to this point, which is beyond all astonishment. You say in your Quran in Armenian, that Mahmed in Armenian says that on the day of the coming of God the Father, he says to Jesus, you said, I am the Son of God and equal to him. Then Jesus rejects that, saying, no, Lord, far be that from me, or God forbid. And when did you command me that I should preach thus and be completely rejected by the Christians? And this seems to be an allusion to Quran, Surah number 516 in the Messiah International translation. And beware the day when Allah will say, O Jesus, son of Mary, did you say to the people, take me and my mother as deities besides Allah? He will say, exalted are you. It was not for me to say that to which I have no right. If I had said it, you would have known it. You know what is within myself, and I do not know what is within yourself. Indeed, it is you who is knower of the unseen. I think that is what he refers to here. The letter's turning point. So this pivotal text denying Christ's divinity is a culmination point in the letter. In Grigor's view, such great stupidity and stubbornness, and above all ignorance. He is not sparing, but it can be worse. The preceding pages had seen a string in the letter, had seen a string of witnesses about Christ, and now Grigor turns to prayer. So his witness, so to say, continues as a prayer. Almost continuous quotation from the Bible. It's just one string after another. Reading Moses and the prophets, we found that you were the Messiah, born with the Father before the morning star. He enumerates miracles, the transfiguration, confessions of faith expressed in the New Testament. And then Muhammad's denial of the crucifixion, had someone else crucified in his stead. He asks God in his prayer, will you retreat before Muhammad? And 276 to 78, that's the lines, that's the sentences in that letter. There's more than 300 sentences. The Muslims' accusation that the gospel has been altered. Muhammad calls us thieves, and even worse, that they altered the gospel of Christ and wrote falsehoods. He counters Muhammad with the prophet's sayings. He calls for Amir Ibrahim to convert to Christianity and says, now, as we said before, do not harden your heart like your fathers in the desert. but may you open the eyes of the thoughts of your heart and be persuaded to obey the word of God. And the final sentence mentions the wish to worship the Trinity, who is one Godhead, together with Amir Ibrahim. And we come to some, perhaps too evident conclusions. So the questions Amir Ibrahim asks are set against the background of 10th century Muslim polemics against Christianity. These polemic texts usually do not directly address Christian opponents, but seem to be written as instructions for Muslims. Amir Ibrahim receives answers based in scripture and its Christian interpretation. There is therefore no direct engagement with the position of the Muslims, at least no direct logical refutal of them. And this mirrors the approach of the Islamic polemical tracts, as I just mentioned. Yet Amir Ibrahim is a very real interlocutor, born from a contemporary phenomenon, intermarriage between Muslims and Christians. And Grigor persuades him to, with shared lineage. So he says, you and I are both from the same stock through your mother. Their shared interest in philosophy, which he finds of a higher order, and in earnest seeking of the truth. I think that is it. Thank you very much.
Okay, we are open to discussion and questions. I would like to raise one question before.
Yes, please.
Would you be able to illuminate us on the period, of the 10th century, when there is a renaissance of art, as you mentioned, Christianity is gaining grounds, monasteries are built, and churches. What was the real challenge, facing the Byzantines vis-a-vis the Muslims during this period? Was it a direct clash between them? We didn't really get, I didn't grasp, the entire picture, the entire scenery around this period.
So yeah, in the 9th century, the caliphate loses strength. Mm-hmm. And the Byzantine Empire begins to move eastwards, mm-hmm. And the Armenians and others try to carve out their own states, which they succeed in at the end of the 9th century. And in the meantime, the Byzantine Empire continues to move east, but it takes a full century before they actually can overthrow Armenia. And in that intervening period, the Armenians fall back on their older traditions. The financial means are available through economic position of the two kingdoms to build churches, monasteries, etc. In the 10th century, also in the Byzantine Empire, the controversy between Chalcedonians, so the Byzantine Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, and the non-Chalcedonians, so the Armenians and others, becomes more acute because with the influx of Armenians into the empire, there are bishoprics that are in direct conflict with one another. And so you see Armenians move back into Armenia in the 10th century and found monasteries in that way. And maybe the monastery of Marek is one of those monasteries that was founded as a consequence of that movement. It's also one of the monasteries where Greek was well known. So you get a re-import of knowledge of Greek, which had been interrupted in the Arab dominations period. So yeah, you get this resurgence in Armenia and a gradual co-optation by the Byzantine Empire, and you see province after province fall, and then the two kingdoms, mostly on the basis of legality as well. So there's a case to be made for the kingdom of Ani that went legally into the hands of the Byzantine Empire. Certainly the Byzantine Empire thought so. Namely, the previous king had bequeathed his kingdom upon his death to the empire in exchange for protection, military protection. And because of the coming of the Seljuks, in 1018 they start to raid into Armenia, and in 1021 actually Grigor's father is killed during such a event. And so yeah, I think that may be one of the reasons.
Right.
And
you know the Boogeyman heresy.
Yes.
Heresy. Was it influential in this area or not?
I don't think so. It's more the Paulicians and the Tondrakians in the 9th and 10th century. So anti-hierarchy, anti-sacraments, and yes, Grigor has a lot to deal with them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Because I think we went. Yes.
Can you engage yourself? First of all, I'm from the Hebrew University, and so thank you almost everybody for arranging everything and everybody who's here. So more time you need together. It's interesting. You touched upon it too. You gave a whole nice list of the works which are basically internal for strengthening the faith and not for convincing to the side, written in Arabic. And I think it's an important point that politically the Islamic polity is fragmenting and weakening, and there's all kinds of semi-autonomous and basically independent regimes around the Islamic world, and the caliphate, of course, weakening. But it's the 10th century, beginning of the 10th century, starting before, of course, but the 10th century is a remarkably robust time intellectually in things written in Arabic, not only by Muslims, but things written in Arabic.
And Christian.
And the 11th century, of course, too.
Yeah.
So, it's a give and take between literate, speaking several languages, including Arabic and Persian too, and it's give and take. So they have to respond, and again, for mainly craftsmen, for internal. Maybe there was actually external. So I think that's part of it too.
No, it's true. I have in one of my notes for Theodore Abu Qura, who writes in Syriac and Arabic, if I'm not mistaken, in the late 9th century. He's important and is reacted to by Muslims, but in a sort of throwaway way. But yes, certainly within the empire and its various areas, there's very vigorous debate. It's quite interesting to see the intellectual overflow of that in this area in Armenia, where there's no longer direct Muslim statehood to curb them, so to say. And yeah, new situations arising with intermarriage, etc. I found interesting to see. Yeah.
Somewhere along the line there was something about Hebrew.
No, I don't think so. He's credited with a lot of languages, also Hebrew, but I think that is a figment of enthusiastic 20th century scholarship. He tells in his commentary on Dionysius Thrax how he learned Arabic, with great difficulties. At first the letters, then the grammar, and then I enjoyed I think some of the Jahiliya poets, which is quite an exceptional witness in Armenian in that period. Yeah. He knew Syriac, Greek,
and Persian.
Probably, yes, yeah, maybe Georgian, but further, the Hebrew knowledge in Armenia was not very widespread at all.
Thank you very much. I may be stating the obvious here, certainly. I think to begin with, what we're looking here is something that is meant predominantly for internal consumption, for an Armenian audience. And I think the late 10th century context and the intermarriage context is very apt for thinking about the objectives of this text. Maybe you could elaborate on that. And that is, first of all, from a Muslim perspective, this dialogue would never really take place because the Muslim interlocutor is not considered a Muslim. His father is Christian.
No, it's the other way around.
It's the other way around.
His mother is Christian. His father is a Muslim, so he would be
Okay.
considered Muslim. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
But the other point is that Armenia, Iran, and this part, these are parts of the Muslim world where Islamization was mainly the process of intermarriage and the kind of gradual permeation of Muslim presence in those territories, where you see the preservation of a local culture and relative absence of Arabization. And at the same time, you have all these martyrologies that are springing in Palestine, Syria, Egypt, that they are also meant to address Christians who either intermarried, converted, and showing them there's a path back.
No.
I'm thinking about your text, and I'm thinking this is a moment of Byzantine so-called Renaissance in terms of territory, a rise in personal confidence in the Christian side. And so this is perhaps an attempt to address those who may have been tempted at some point across the line. Now you have your path back through these argumentations, and so maybe look at this polemic material in the context of this growing re-expansion of the Byzantine power and the gradual recession of
It's interesting. It's because it probably dates to the period when the Seljuks are already invading, and there is renewed pressure from another side, so to say. I certainly so to say hear what you're saying. I wonder to what extent this took place in Armenia. Nina Garsorian has pointed out that there was a wane and rise in the direction of intermarriage throughout the 9th and 10th century, depending on who was in power. If the Muslim emirates in Armenia were more at the upper hand, then the direction of marriage would be to the Islamic way. But if the Christian side was stronger, it would be the other way around. And I find this 11th century case very interesting, because it is set up in a way that you may wonder whether this Amir, what is he actually? What is his aim with these letters? Does he have a political aim with it? Does he want to choose between the Islamic realms or the Armenian world, which is under great pressure there? Or is it a real internal conundrum, if you want, a matter of conscience, with your mother being Christian and wanting to perhaps follow her faith, but then having to overcome the objections that are stated. So yeah, I find it quite an enriching witness, which is it's quite rare in this period. The type of martyrdoms that you mentioned, you see these far more in 5 centuries later, in the late 14th and 15th century, in Anatolia, in the Lake Van area, for instance, when the Ottomans, well before the Ottomans come, but in the wane of the in the wake of the disappearance of the Kingdom of Cilicia in 1375, when Turkomans come in and override the area, and we see martyrdoms that reflect exactly what you say, all kinds of walks of life, men and women, business people, young people, people who are apprenticed with Muslims, who are taken to be Muslims, and they go back to Christian areas, present themselves as Christians, and are then, so to say, unmasked and killed. And that's in Armenia, yes, that happens far more in the 15th century. At least we have more texts about it in the 15th century. So we have less texts in that sense of martyrdoms in the period that I'm talking about. Yeah. But yeah, no, I find it extremely interesting what you say, and I'll keep that background certainly in mind. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Thanks very much. Just one little point. I think somewhere at the beginning, you know, experience of Hellenization.
Yeah.
So would it be sort of correct to say that he have in his work, in the first work, writing the Bible as line, this is kind of an Arabization of scripture.
Yeah.
And we also have Hellenization in other ways. So I guess are these sort of two trends, two sides of the same coin? Making it more universal.
Yes, it's yes. Our Armenian culture is quite open to all kinds of influence, if you want to call it that. So absorption of other cultures. Yes, so we have this big push of Syriac and Greek translations up to the 8th century. Then in the Arab period, we have less, and then interestingly, with Grigor Magistros and with Grigor Magistros about half a century earlier, you begin to see the taking in of Arabic poetry, which becomes one of three layers of development of medieval Armenian poetry. The second layer is Persian, and the third layer is later again is Turkish. And so yes, you're quite right. That does take place throughout the Middle Ages. Yeah. And so some things overlap, if you speak. Thank you for that.
Can you tell us more on forced conversion to the Islamic period?
Yeah, I think again, to go back to the 15th century, 14th century, 15th century, there you see this so to say non-choice, adopt Islam or you lose your life. It can go either way. And yeah, the interesting thing is that conversion to Islam is a taboo in Armenian historiography. There are no Muslim Armenians. You lose your Armenian identity if you become a Muslim. And the historiographers were clerics, so we have a problem of perception there. But certainly we know of this happening, just as we know of reconversion to Zoroastrianism in the earlier period, in the 5th and 45th century. With stronger Mazdian prosecution of Christians from the Sasanian Empire.
Other heresies influence, impact Armenia, for instance, Manichaeism?
Yeah, the Manichaeism passed through Armenia, but did not have a great impact. I think there was, yes, sorry.
Just a follow-up, actually. The children of mixed marriages, like the example you gave here, what would their identity have been seen as by other people? Like how would they be perceived within Armenia?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wouldn't know. I think that this Amir Ibrahim clearly presents as a Muslim to his name. And but Armenians have strange names. Christian Armenians can have very Arab names. They can dress in an Arab fashion. And it's rather interesting to see how they do that. There is a 20th and 21st century parallel, potentially parallel, because I don't know this area very well, but ever since a Turkish human rights defender, lawyer, Fethiye Çetin, I don't know, she wrote a book. My grandmother was an Armenian, and this brought about, this is in the late 2000s, early 2010 or so, when it was still possible under Erdogan to come up with your Kurdishness and your Armenianness, etc. And there turned out to be a whole hundreds of thousands of people who knew they had an Armenian background through their grandparents, not through their parents. Their parents had hidden it from usually the grandmothers tell them that they are actually, I'm an Armenian and you, so you are partly Armenian as well. And they then wanted to a certain extent, either to sort of park that Armenianness. Okay, I'm Armenian, that's fine, but I'm living in Turkey as a Muslim, that's what it is. Or they wanted to convert to Christianity. That sometimes happens as well. And that poses actually quite a problem for the Armenian Church, how to react to that, because they cannot follow that path in Turkey. Certainly not now. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult situation. So I don't know. Again, it's a question I would like to be able to answer better, but I couldn't give you numbers or tendencies or whatever. No, certainly. We know of the 8th century when an Armenian nobleman who was raised in Baghdad as a Muslim came back to Armenia as a grown-up man and chose to be a Christian, and he was then killed because he was considered an apostate by the Muslims, so we have a martyrdom of him, and again Nina Garcians as well. This is actually not really a martyr because according to Islamic law, he was a Muslim, he apostatized. So that's not, he was not a Christian to begin with. So that's martyr.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to hear more about the influence of Plato on Grigor, because in the first, the introduction to the first epic that you read out, interlocutor, Nazi,
yeah,
he's said to know, or to be influenced by Plato and Homer.
Yeah.
And there's this very kind of Platonic dialogue, almost the arrogance of the interlocutor. And then you've got Grigor almost as this kind of Homeric figure, then going off and translating into verse.
Yes.
So do you see a lot of this kind of dialogic form?
Well, he certainly champions Plato a lot in his letters, and Timaeus is very important for the geometry as the key to unlocking the understanding of creation, the building blocks of the universe. That is what he ends quite a lot of letters with, and he certainly esteems philosophers very highly, even though the letters do not contain, in my view, what we would call philosophical treatises. He didn't write any dialogues other than the part you heard, and some question answer things in letters, etc. Argumentation. But yes, he is definitely someone who's in the line of Neoplatonism, so also the Aristotelian line. One of the works he quotes most in his letters is the Prolegomena to Aristotelic philosophy by David, the principal philosopher, who's one of the last heads of the school of Alexandria. It may have been an Armenian. His works also translated into Armenian. 6th century, we think. So yes, he's definitely in that line. And again, this emphasis on Plato is rather striking. So he ends his letters, also a letter on in poetry. He ends with emphasizing the importance of the hexagon, of the line, the cube, the plane. So the basic. He tries to establish through these quotations or allusions to the Timaeus the harmony between his own creation of poetry and the setup of the cosmos, and so to be in line with divine revelation and the potential that we as humans have to be co-creators of reality. That's, again, all the questions you ask give me food for thought to while I'm working on these letters. Probably need to be 140 before I can finish with them. I hope that miraculous medicine will be with us soon. But, yeah.
If I understood correctly, did you say that Grigor was somehow he related himself to Parthian origin and Parthian royal origin even?
Yeah.
Is that a common thing?
No, not at all. No, not at all. No.
Pahlavi.
Yeah, Pahlavi. Yes, yeah, like the Shah of Iran. Yeah. Yes, no, it's not common to do that. It's of course common in medieval times to have your lineage clearly defined and to make sure that it's not less than it can be. So we have 5 generations of his family that we know of, and then probably he connects with a very important family by the name of the Kamsarakans, and they are related to the Parthevs, the Parthians. And so he actually positions himself as both an inheritor of the highest clerical office and the highest office in the land, which is a jibe at the Bagratunis, who are parvenus in the 9th century and then take over the whole. There's still Bagrationis in Georgia now, so the same family. But he gets his own with the 1.5 century of Pahlawuni Catholicoi, leaders of the church, who are really who keep the show on the road in the 12th century in that sense.
But that would be like the Parthian connection would be a good source of prestige.
Yeah.
And like, for example, they're not Sasanians.
Yeah.
They go way back in time.
Yeah. No, and in Armenia, it's extremely important not to be a Sasanian, because the Arsacids were Parthians, and so in 224, when the Sasanians took over, the Armenians were not well pleased, and we have fantastic account of Armenian stubbornness in the sight of the Sasanians. When an Armenian king is invited to come to Ctesiphon, the king asks him, "I've always been good to you, but you've never really wanted to be friends with me. So come, let us be friends. I will give you great gifts." So he says, "Yes, sure." And then his magi tell him, he said, this man we have to find out whether this man is telling the truth. You can't send him back to Armenia and he starts going against you again. So he says, what you should do, get land from Armenia, put it on 1/2 of your tent, and start walking in circles around the tent while you have a conversation with him. and then we get this absurd situation that they go, I suppose, arm in arm or hand in hand, dressed in identical clothes, Yes, we have this. Your family are parvenus. As soon as he comes to the Armenian soil, and this is a fantastic 5th century source of the 4th century event. So now the Sasanians were no good, and it got worse, of course, when the Armenians became Christians in early 4th century. So there's a double layer of antipathy there. And so sorry, someone else.
Are the letters all the sources?
Sorry?
Do you have any other sources about the person, Amir?
About the Amir? Yeah, that's a good question again. I've been looking for it. We know who he is. He isn't. Who is he? Probably from a high noble family. It says he comes from Syunik, which is in the south of Armenia, and has its own kingdom at the time. But no, he's not really identified. So that's another thing I need to work on. And also, we don't know who his father is. It's been all kinds of suggestions have been made, but they are not to be taken seriously. So yes, more work. Sorry.
Just one quick thought that crossed my mind, and of course I'm sure you can explain that, but I mean the purpose of the encounter with an Amir is the well-known one in Eastern polemic tradition.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I thought it would be, so to say, more fun for the time being to assume that he's real, because the situation is a real life situation. This intermarriage is plausible, and so I would like to maintain that starting position for the time being. But yes, it could be fictitious.
So
well.
it's rather it's a pedagogic model in a way.
Yes, yeah, it could certainly do that. Yeah, yes, and the interesting thing then, the question that follows is, well, how do we see that happened? And that is so the reception of Grigor Magistros' letters. That is something that I have to come to.
I just want to make a little comment, inspired by what you said in general.
Well, yeah.
Thank you.
It's again my pleasure, the 5th or 6th time, I think.
I don't know where everything worked out in place, but I think it's important for those kinds of Middle Eastern studies, European history, Byzantine studies, ancient history, but I feel it's important for Middle Eastern studies that I think it's really important to emphasize, and we want to hear again, that Armenian history and studies in Armenian culture are very much a part of the Middle Eastern studies. Should be very much a part of the Middle Eastern studies. And I think certainly the same, maybe it's already clear to everybody involved in the studies and other fields to the West, but certainly you can't say it enough. And clearly it's the other way around too, that the Armenians are interacting with everybody over centuries and into the 21st century too. And so there's no Middle Eastern studies without Armenian studies. I guess there's no Armenian studies without.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, no, that's definitely certainly the second part. Armenian studies as a silo is not very productive. The Armenians weren't. They were interacting with everyone else. Would be vain to do that way. Yeah, so yeah, I fully endorse what you say. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.